Hey, my friend. Tonight we'll drift through one of the deepest questions science dares to ask. Can the universe itself be aware? Maybe even think through you? Let your thoughts slow, your breathing soften, and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Mystery of Awareness. Consciousness is the simple yet astonishing fact that experience exists from a point of view. It is not merely information processing or the performance of behavior, but the felt presence of being, the vividness of color, sound, and thought. In scientific terms, this is phenomenal awareness, the first-person character of mental life that cannot be observed directly. Explaining why such awareness exists at all remains one of the hardest problems in science. Neuroscience has made impressive progress in explaining how the brain processes information. Attention, perception, memory, and decision-making can all be modeled as computations carried out by networks of neurons exchanging electrical and chemical signals. These models describe the mechanisms and algorithms that allow the brain to represent and respond to the world. Yet, none of them explain why these processes are accompanied by subjective experience, why information feels like something rather than nothing. Because private experience cannot be measured directly, research focuses on neural correlates of consciousness, the brain events that change reliably when a person reports awareness of a stimulus. Experiments such as binocular rivalry and visual masking are designed so that perception alternates while sensory input stays the same. The results show that early sensory areas can respond to unseen stimuli, but conscious perception involves broader, longer-lasting patterns that link distant regions of the cortex. Activity becomes more synchronized and integrated when a stimulus reaches awareness, suggesting that consciousness depends on the brain's ability to sustain and coordinate information across many areas at once. This integration appears in both timing and communication. Feed-forward signals can register a stimulus in a fraction of a second, but awareness requires recurrent processing. Loops of activity between sensory and association regions that reinforce and stabilize the representation. Electroencephalography and intracranial recordings reveal late bursts of high-frequency activity and strong frontoparietal interactions when subjects become aware of a target. These effects suggest that consciousness is not a property of isolated neurons, but of dynamic cooperation across networks. Different theories interpret these dynamics in distinct ways. The global neuronal workspace model proposes that when a local sensory representation gains enough strength, it ignites a widespread network that broadcasts its content throughout the brain. Consciousness, on this view, corresponds to global availability of information. Integrated information theory instead defines consciousness as the intrinsic causal power of a system to influence itself as a whole. A system rich in internal integration, such as the human brain, would have high consciousness. A disjointed system would have little or none. Other proposals emphasize recurrent processing confined to sensory areas, or predictive processing models in which perception is the brain's best guess about the causes of its inputs. All these frameworks agree that awareness depends on rich, bidirectional communication, even if they differ on what makes that communication subjectively felt. Anesthesia and sleep reveal how easily this capacity can fade. Under general anesthesia, molecular changes dampen excitation and disrupt long-range coordination. Brain activity becomes stereotyped and less differentiated, and patients later report no experience. Similar loss of integration occurs in deep non-REM sleep, while dreaming during REM sleep restores complex patterns resembling wakefulness, even in the absence of external input. Measures of how complex or unpredictable the brain's responses are, sometimes called the perturbational complexity index, fall when consciousness is lost and rise again upon awakening. Such results support the idea that consciousness requires both differentiation and integration, many parts contributing, yet coherently linked. Clinical cases underline the same principle. Patients in minimally conscious or unresponsive states can sometimes show hidden awareness. In a few remarkable examples, people who appeared entirely non-responsive were able to modulate their brain activity in specific patterns when asked to imagine playing tennis or walking through their house. Functional imaging detected those responses, demonstrating that consciousness can persist even when behavior disappears. This realization has profound ethical consequences and motivates the search for objective, non-behavioral markers of inner life. Awareness also has a unity that the underlying brain processes do not obviously possess. Color, motion, and shape are computed in separate areas, yet we experience a single, coherent scene. Temporal binding adds further complexity. The brain integrates information over brief windows of time, smoothing the discontinuities of neural firing into the flow of experience. Perception is not an instantaneous snapshot, but a continuous construction. Illusions such as the flash lag effect show that what we perceive as now already includes inferences about events occurred a fraction of a second later. Consciousness, in this sense, is the brain's best fit model of reality, assembled from multiple, slightly asynchronous signals. The sense of self arises from a similar construction. Experiments that manipulate the alignment of vision and touch can make people feel ownership of a rubber hand or even a virtual body. By synchronizing tactile and visual cues, the brain updates its internal model of where I am located. Interoceptive cues, signals from the heart, lungs, and gut, further anchor this model, creating the feeling of being a unified organism. Neuroscience thus treats the self not as a fixed entity, but as a constantly maintained prediction about the body's state in space and time. Despite progress, the explanatory gap remains. Neural activity can be measured with extraordinary precision, but describing mechanisms does not automatically explain why there's something it is like to be that mechanism. Some philosophers argue that once every physical and functional detail is accounted for, nothing is left to explain. Consciousness simply is what certain physical processes feel like from the inside. Others believe that subjective experience requires a new conceptual framework, perhaps even new physical principles. Both views agree that understanding awareness demands both rigorous measurement and conceptual clarity. Quantum physics sometimes enters this discussion because it challenges classical assumptions about reality. In the quantum domain, systems exist in superpositions entangled with one another until measurement collapses them into definite outcomes. Observation itself appears to play a special role. The act of measurement changes what can be said about the system. A few researchers, notably Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, have suggested that consciousness might be related to such quantum collapses occurring within the brain's microtubules. This OR hypothesis remains controversial. Most physicists doubt that delicate quantum states could survive in the warm, wet environment of neural tissue, where decoherence would destroy them almost instantly. Yet the idea persists because certain biological systems, photosynthetic complexes, bird magnetoreception, even aspects of smell, have been shown to exploit quantum coherence in limited ways. These findings do not prove that consciousness is quantum, but they remind us that life can sometimes sustain quantum phenomena under conditions once thought impossible. Even without invoking exotic physics, information theory offers a bridge between matter and mind. A conscious brain is one that maintains a delicate balance. Its activity is neither random nor rigid, but richly structured and responsive. Quantitative measures of complexity and integration capture this balance. The higher these measures, the more the system behaves as a unified, differentiated whole. When consciousness fades in sleep or anesthesia, those values decline. When it returns, they rise. While such correlations do not solve the mystery, they give consciousness a measurable footprint, a way to link subjective states to objective dynamics. Evolutionary reasoning offers another layer of insight. Organisms that can integrate diverse information, vision, memory, emotion, and prediction, can navigate their environments with greater flexibility. Consciousness may have evolved as a computational strategy for adaptive control, a way of modeling the world and the self in enough depth to guide behavior in uncertain conditions. This view does not explain the qualitative feel of experience, but it clarifies why systems like ours might have developed architectures that make experience possible. As artificial systems grow more complex, these questions gain urgency. Machine learning models now exhibit attention, memory, and planning. They simulate some aspects of cognition, but give no sign of subjective experience. Whether an artificial network could ever be conscious depends on whether consciousness is a matter of function, of physical substrate, or of something deeper. The debate itself highlights how elusive awareness remains. We can build machines that mimic reasoning, yet we do not know whether they feel anything at all. Taken together, the evidence suggests that consciousness is a biological process grounded in the organization of the brain rather than a supernatural property. It arises when information is widely integrated, recurrently processed, and stably maintained across multiple regions. Still, knowing how it operates does not yet tell us why it feels like anything. The question that lingers at the edge of science is whether subjective awareness is an emergent property of complex computation or a fundamental aspect of the universe itself, a theme we will explore throughout this series. For now, it is enough to acknowledge the wonder of simply being aware. Every breath, every sound, every flicker of thought is evidence that the universe, through you, is noticing itself. As the day winds down, you can let the questions drift to the background and allow your mind to rest. The mystery of awareness remains, but you do not have to solve it tonight. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts fade, and let the quiet recognition of being conscious dissolve gently into sleep. Chapter 2. The Quantum World Beneath Reality. At the foundation of everything you see, touch, or think lies a world that defies common sense. The quantum world operates according to rules that seem to contradict the logic of everyday life. Yet these rules govern every atom in your body and every spark of light that reaches your eyes. Quantum mechanics does not merely describe an invisible realm. It describes the most precise and successful framework in physics. Still, it remains one of the most conceptually challenging achievements in human thought. a theory that predicts outcomes with astounding accuracy but resists intuitive understanding. When physicists at the beginning of the 20th century studied how matter and energy behaved at very small scales, they encountered phenomena that classical physics could not explain. Light, long understood as a wave, sometimes behaved as if it were made of discrete packets of energy, photons. Matter, thought to consist of solid particles, could also exhibit wave-like properties. Max Planck, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, Louis de Broglie, and others gradually uncovered that the building blocks of reality could not be cleanly separated into particles or waves. They could behave as either, depending on how they were observed. This dual character forced a radical shift in how scientists thought about nature. The most famous demonstration of this duality is the double-slit experiment. When a beam of light or a stream of electrons passes through two narrow slits and onto a screen, an interference pattern appears, alternating bands of brightness and darkness that reveal wave behavior. But when the experiment is performed so that the particles are measured one by one, each lands on the screen as a discrete dot, like tiny bullets. Over time, the dots accumulate into the same interference pattern that waves produce. If detectors are placed at the slits to determine which slit each particle passes through, the pattern changes entirely. The interference disappears, and the particles behave as if they chose a single path. Observation itself seems to alter the outcome. This is not merely a trick of measurement, but a reflection of the underlying mathematics of quantum theory. At the heart of the framework is the wave function, a mathematical object that encodes all possible states of a system. Before measurement, a quantum particle does not have a definite position or momentum. Instead, it exists in a superposition, a combination of possibilities weighted by probabilities. When a measurement occurs, the wave function collapses to a definite outcome, and only one possibility is realized. The mechanism of this collapse is not built into the equations of motion. It is an additional rule that connects the mathematical formalism to experience. This strange behavior extends far beyond thought experiments. Every semiconductor in modern electronics, every laser, and every medical scanner operates because quantum mechanics accurately describes how electrons and photons behave. The energy levels of atoms, the structure of chemical bonds, and the stability of matter itself all depend on quantum principles. Without them, stars would not shine, and molecules could not exist. Yet despite its practical success, quantum theory raises deep questions about the nature of reality. The act of measurement seems to play a special role. Does observation create outcomes, or does it simply reveal them? The Copenhagen interpretation, formulated by Bohr and his colleagues, suggests that quantum systems do not have definite properties until they are measured. Before that, they are described only by probabilities. According to this view, reality at the microscopic level is fundamentally indeterminate, and measurement marks the boundary where potential becomes actual. Not all physicists have been comfortable with that conclusion. Einstein, who helped found the theory, was one of its most persistent critics. He famously remarked that God does not play dice with the universe, objecting to the idea that fundamental processes were random. Together with Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, he devised the EPR paradox, a thought experiment that questioned whether quantum mechanics provided a complete description of reality. They imagined two particles that interacted and then moved far apart but remained linked by their shared history. If one particle's property was measured, the other's corresponding property would be determined instantly, even at great distance. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance, because it seemed to violate the limit imposed by the speed of light. In the 1960s, physicist John Bell developed a way to test whether such correlations could be explained by hidden local variables, unseen causes that predetermined outcomes without faster-than-light influence. Experiments performed decades later, most notably by Alain Aspect and others, confirmed that quantum correlations violate Bell's inequalities, proving that no local hidden variable theory can reproduce the predictions of quantum mechanics. The results suggest that reality at the quantum level is non-local in a subtle sense. The behavior of one part of an entangled system cannot be completely described without reference to the other, no matter how far apart they are. Entanglement lies at the center of modern quantum technology. When two particles become entangled, their properties become linked in such a way that the state of one cannot be described independently of the state of the other. Measuring one immediately defines the other, though no information travels between them in any classical sense. Entanglement has been observed not only in photons but also in atoms, superconducting circuits, and even small mechanical systems. Quantum computers aim to use entangled states as a resource to perform computations that would be impossible on classical machines, exploiting superposition and interference to explore many possibilities simultaneously. Despite these triumphs, the interpretation of quantum mechanics remains open. Some physicists take the view that the wave function is a complete description of reality, and that collapse is a physical process. Others prefer the many worlds interpretation, which proposes that all possible outcomes of quantum events occur, each in its own branch of a vast multiverse. In that view, measurement does not collapse the wave function. It divides the universe into parallel versions, each containing an observer who perceives a particular result. The theory is mathematically consistent but philosophically extravagant, leaving open the question of why we experience only one branch. Another interpretation, known as decoherence, explains why quantum behavior disappears at macroscopic scales. When a quantum system interacts with its environment, its delicate superpositions become entangled with countless other degrees of freedom. The result is that interference between alternative outcomes becomes effectively impossible, and the system behaves classically. Decoherence does not explain the subjective appearance of a single outcome, but it clarifies why large objects obey classical laws. It bridges the microscopic and macroscopic worlds without invoking mysterious forces, showing that quantum uncertainty does not vanish, but becomes hidden in the complexity of the environment. For all its strangeness, quantum theory obeys a strict mathematical discipline. The probabilities it assigns are not arbitrary, but follow precise rules encoded in the Schrödinger equation. The evolution of the wave function is deterministic. Randomness enters only when measurement converts potentiality into actuality. In this sense, quantum mechanics is both predictable and indeterminate. Predictable in the evolution of probabilities, indeterminate in the specific outcomes that are realized. The duality challenges the classical idea that nature follows a single continuous trajectory through time. On the scale of everyday life, quantum effects average out and the world appears stable and definite. But at the boundaries of physics, inside atoms, within the fabric of space-time, and perhaps in the processes that shape thought, these effects become inescapable. Every chemical reaction involves tunneling of electrons through potential barriers that would be impossible in classical physics. The colors of materials, the conductivity of metals, and the operation of semiconductors all depend on the quantization of energy levels. Even biological systems show hints of quantum behavior. Photosynthetic complexes in plants appear to use quantum coherence to transfer energy efficiently, and certain birds navigate using magnetoreception that may involve quantum entanglement in molecules of their retinas. Such findings suggest that nature has found ways to harness quantum effects under conditions once thought too warm or chaotic for coherence to survive. Still, it is important to separate what is known from what is speculative. The existence of quantum coherence in biological systems does not imply that consciousness itself is quantum mechanical. The brain is a warm, wet, noisy environment, and calculations suggest that quantum states would decohere too rapidly to influence neural signaling directly. However, understanding how biological systems achieve quantum robustness may inspire new insights into how complex, open systems manage information and order. In that sense, the quantum world provides not only a physical foundation for matter, but a conceptual foundation for complexity. Quantum mechanics also reshapes our understanding of information itself. In the quantum view, information is not an abstract record, but a physical property that cannot be copied or observed without disturbance. This insight underlies the field of quantum information theory and gives rise to ideas such as quantum cryptography and teleportation. When applied to cosmology, it raises questions about how information is stored in black holes and whether the universe as a whole preserves or loses information over time. These debates link the smallest and largest scales of existence, suggesting that the same principles governing subatomic particles may also govern the evolution of the cosmos. At the philosophical level, quantum mechanics forces a reconsideration of what it means to observe reality. The observer is not a passive spectator, but an active participant in defining outcomes. Yet this participation need not involve consciousness in a mystical sense. In physics, an observation is any interaction that transfers information. A photon scattering from an electron, a detector recording a signal. Still, the metaphor of participation resonates deeply because it reminds us that reality, as experienced, is not independent of interaction. Every act of perception, every measurement, is a meeting between system and observer, between world and mind. In this way, quantum theory provides both a scientific framework and an invitation to reflection. It tells us that the universe is not composed of solid, unchanging things, but of probabilities, relationships, and transformations. It suggests that certainty is an emergent feature of scale, not an intrinsic property of nature. The stability of the macroscopic world, the ground under our feet, the persistence of memory, arises from countless quantum interactions averaging into predictability. Beneath that surface, the world is restless, fluctuating, and profoundly interconnected. As we peer into this invisible domain, we confront the limits of knowledge itself. The uncertainty principle tells us that we cannot simultaneously know a particle's position and momentum with arbitrary precision. This is not a flaw of measurement, but a statement about reality. The properties of nature are not all defined at once. The universe allows only certain combinations of knowledge, enforcing a balance between what can be known and what must remain indeterminate. Far from being a defect, This uncertainty is what allows structure and stability to exist. Without quantum fluctuations, atoms could not form, and without their delicate balance, the universe would collapse into uniform emptiness. In daily life, it is easy to forget that everything we experience, from the warmth of sunlight to the rhythm of thought, depends on these invisible principles. Each atom in your body is governed by probabilities. Each photon in your room is a ripple in a quantum field. The solidity of the world, the persistence of matter, and the continuity of time are emergent illusions born from the ceaseless motion of quantum waves. At the edge of understanding, quantum physics invites humility. It reminds us that the universe is not built from simple, separate things, but from patterns of possibility that only reveal themselves through interaction. The laws that govern them are clear, yet their meaning stretches beyond equations. We live in a world where particles can exist in many states at once, where distance can dissolve into connection, and where observation brings potential into being. Perhaps this is why so many scientists and philosophers find quantum theory both unsettling and deeply beautiful. It portrays a cosmos that is neither fully deterministic nor chaotic, but balanced between order and uncertainty. A universe that evolves through probabilities, yet gives rise to the stability required for life and awareness. As you reflect on this invisible foundation, it may help to imagine that everything around you, your breath, the air, the stars, is part of one vast, vibrating field of potential. Your consciousness, observing and contemplating it, is another expression of that same field. The boundary between observer and observed becomes less distinct, and in that realization, there is a quiet peace. The quantum world does not just exist beneath reality. It is reality unfolding through you and through everything that ever was. You can let that thought settle like dust in starlight. The mystery remains, but for tonight, it is enough to know that beneath all certainty lies motion. Beneath all matter lies possibility. And beneath your awareness lies the same quantum fabric that holds the universe together. Chapter 3. The classical brain versus the quantum brain. For more than a century, neuroscience has described the human brain as an intricate but ultimately classical machine, an electrochemical network where signals pass from one neuron to the next through predictable, measurable interactions. In this view, consciousness emerges not from the exotic behavior of quantum particles, but from the staggering complexity of classical computation. The quantum brain hypothesis, however, suggests that this view might be incomplete, that at some level, quantum effects could influence or even generate consciousness itself. Understanding the tension between these two perspectives is essential before exploring any deeper claim about the connection between mind and the quantum world. The classical picture of the brain begins with the neuron, the fundamental unit of the nervous system. Each neuron receives electrical impulses through its dendrites, integrates them in the cell body, and transmits an action potential along its axon to communicate with other neurons across synapses. Chemical neurotransmitters released at these synapses can either excite or inhibit the next neuron. The result is a vast network of electrical and chemical signaling with more than 80 billion neurons forming trillions of connections. These connections are not static. They change through learning, experience, and plasticity. Modern neuroscience views this network as a dynamic system whose patterns of activity encode perception, memory, and action. Every thought, feeling and decision corresponds to coordinated patterns of neuronal firing. These patterns can be measured using techniques like electroencephalography, magnetoencephalography, or functional magnetic resonance imaging, all of which reveal large-scale oscillations and communication between distant regions. The rhythms of neural activity are not random. They reflect organized coordination that allows information to be exchanged efficiently. From this standpoint, consciousness is an emergent property of a physical system capable of integrating and broadcasting information across its structure, a view consistent with the global neuronal workspace and integrated information theories discussed earlier. In the classical brain model, all relevant processes are governed by the deterministic laws of chemistry and electricity. Ions flow through membrane channels, synaptic vesicles release neurotransmitters, and receptor molecules respond according to well-understood thermodynamic principles. Randomness exists in the sense of noise, but not in the quantum sense of superposition or entanglement. The system is nonlinear and complex, yet it behaves according to the same physical laws that describe every biological organism. Awareness, in this framework, is an emergent product of interaction, not a fundamental force or quantum state. Proponents of the quantum brain hypothesis argue that this view may underestimate the brain's subtlety. The reasoning is simple. The brain is made of matter, and matter is quantum at its core. If quantum principles govern the behavior of electrons, atoms, and molecules, then perhaps certain aspects of cognition, particularly those involving consciousness, cannot be fully captured by classical descriptions. The question is not whether quantum physics applies to it at some level. It must. The question is whether specifically quantum effects, such as superposition, entanglement, or coherence, play an active, functional role in how the brain processes information. The most famous attempt to formalize this idea is the orchestrated objective reduction, OR theory, proposed by physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. They suggested that quantum computations occur within microtubules, tiny cylindrical structures inside neurons that help maintain cell shape and transport molecules. According to their model, these microtubules could sustain quantum coherent states that collapse in an orchestrated fashion, giving rise to discrete moments of conscious awareness. Each collapse in this picture represents a fundamental act of experience linked to the geometry of space-time itself. While elegant in concept, the OR theory faces serious empirical and theoretical challenges. The brain operates at roughly 37 degrees Celsius in a constantly fluctuating environment filled with thermal noise and molecular collisions. Quantum coherence, the property that allows particles to exist in superpositions, typically lasts only femtoseconds in such conditions. Calculations by physicist Max Tegmark in the 1990s estimated that decoherence in neural microstructures would occur far too quickly to influence neural signaling. Even if microtubules could sustain brief quantum states, there is little evidence that such states could scale up to affect the timing of neuronal firing or the coordination of large brain regions. In response, Hameroff and colleagues have argued that certain biological structures can protect quantum coherence through shielding, collective vibration modes, or ordered water layers. They point to examples in quantum biology, such as photosynthesis or bird magnetoreception, as evidence that nature can exploit quantum effects even at physiological temperatures. These examples show that coherence can persist longer than expected in structured molecular environments. However, whether similar mechanisms exist in the brain remains unproven. Unlike photosynthetic complexes, neurons are large, warm, and highly active cells. Their primary function is to transmit electrical signals, not to preserve delicate quantum correlations. The debate between the classical and quantum brain perspectives is not merely technical. It reflects deeper questions about the nature of explanation. The classical framework is reductionist. It assumes that higher-order phenomena like consciousness emerge from lower-level physical interactions that obey known laws. The quantum brain idea, in contrast, suggests that consciousness may be inseparable from the fundamental structure of reality, perhaps even from the quantum fabric of space-time. These views are not entirely incompatible, but they emphasize different layers of description. One focuses on biological mechanisms, the other on physical foundations. To assess whether quantum effects are relevant to consciousness, one must ask whether the brain performs operations that cannot be accounted for by classical computation alone. Classical computers can simulate many physical systems with sufficient complexity and time. Quantum computers, by contrast, can perform certain tasks exponentially faster by exploiting superposition and entanglement. If the brain were somehow a quantum computer, it might achieve levels of efficiency or parallelism unattainable by classical means. Yet there is no evidence that human cognition exceeds the computational limits of classical systems in a way that would require quantum explanation. The brain's speed and capacity are extraordinary, but still within the range of what large-scale parallel classical systems could, in principle, reproduce. Some researchers explore a middle ground, proposing that even if the brain does not operate as a quantum computer, quantum mechanics could subtly influence its classical behavior. Random quantum events at the level of ion channels or neurotransmitter release might introduce microscopic variability that becomes amplified through nonlinear dynamics. In this sense, quantum uncertainty could contribute to the apparent randomness or creativity of thought without requiring coherent quantum computation. Still, this influence would remain statistical rather than functional. It would add noise rather than structured quantum information processing. From a neuroscientific standpoint, the evidence for a purely classical brain is overwhelming. The timing of neural spikes, the propagation of action potentials, and the chemical transmission across synapses all conform to biophysical models that make testable predictions. Pharmacology and anesthesiology manipulate these processes daily, altering consciousness through molecular interactions that are well understood within classical chemistry. No drug or intervention has ever been shown to affect awareness by tuning quantum states. They work by changing receptor activity, ion channel conductance, or neurotransmitter balance. Nevertheless, quantum physics may still offer conceptual value. It reminds us that matter itself is not static, but dynamic and probabilistic. The brain, composed of this matter, inherits those fundamental uncertainties. Even if these fluctuations average out at larger scales, they contribute to the richness and variability of biological systems. They ensure that the brain, like all of nature, is not a rigid machine, but a probabilistic network whose behavior can never be perfectly predicted. The discussion often extends beyond biology into philosophy. Some thinkers argue that the classical brain model cannot explain the subjective nature of consciousness, the what it feels like aspect of experience. They suggest that if consciousness were purely classical, it would be fully describable in third-person terms, and subjective experience would be redundant. Quantum theories of mind appeal to the intrinsic indeterminacy of quantum mechanics as a potential bridge between physical processes and subjective awareness. While this remains speculative, it reflects a deep intuition that consciousness might be woven into the same fabric that gives rise to physical reality itself. Yet scientific caution demands restraint. The explanatory power of quantum mechanics lies in its ability to predict measurable outcomes, not to serve as a metaphor for mystery. Until evidence demonstrates that quantum coherence or entanglement plays a role in neural computation, the classical model remains the foundation of neuroscience. Its success in explaining perception, memory, learning, and even disorders of consciousness demonstrates that a great deal of mental life can be accounted for without invoking quantum phenomena. Still, the idea of a quantum brain holds poetic resonance. It reminds us that the divide between matter and mind is not absolute. At the smallest scales, the physical world is not made of solid objects, but of probabilities and relationships. The atoms forming each neuron are themselves quantum systems, entangled with the wider cosmos through countless interactions. Whether or not consciousness depends on quantum states, it undeniably arises from them, since everything that exists does. The classical brain, then, is not separate from the quantum world. It is its macroscopic expression, a pattern of coherence and chaos shaped by eons of evolution. If we zoom in far enough, the distinction between classical and quantum begins to blur. Decoherence ensures that the brain appears classical at human scales, yet underneath, every ionic current, every synaptic vesicle, and every molecule obeys quantum laws. The classical brain is the quantum brain viewed through the lens of scale, a system where quantum probabilities have stabilized into patterns we can observe and measure. In that sense, the debate is less about opposition than about perspective. What remains truly profound is that consciousness, whatever its precise mechanism, allows the universe to reflect upon its own foundations. The brain, whether classical or quantum, is a structure that organizes matter in such a way that awareness emerges. The particles composing it were once part of ancient stars, governed by the same equations that describe electrons in a hydrogen atom. Now, arranged in this intricate biological form, they contemplate those very equations. You can take a moment to imagine that. Right now, your awareness is the universe's way of looking back at itself. Whether your thoughts are patterns of electrical activity or waves of quantum probability, they are made of the same substance as everything else, the same cosmic material that built galaxies and light. The classical brain and the quantum brain are not separate stories, but two versions of one continuous narrative, one describing how consciousness operates, the other what it is built from. As you let this thought settle, it becomes easier to appreciate the quiet miracle of perception. Within the firing of neurons or the trembling of particles, the universe found a way to know that it exists. Whether that knowing arises from classical complexity or quantum coherence may not change the feeling of being alive, of sensing the world and reflecting upon it. What matters is that awareness happens at all, fragile, temporary, yet vast enough to hold the entire cosmos in thought. Let that realization drift through you like a soft current. The brain that holds your consciousness, classical or quantum, is the product of billions of years of cosmic evolution. It is both an instrument of biology and a ripple of the universe itself. In that stillness, you can feel a kind of continuity, the sense that to be conscious is to participate in the unfolding of reality, to witness the quantum world made flesh, and to rest for a moment in its quiet wonder. Chapter 4. The Penrose-Hameroff Hypothesis. Few scientific ideas have captured both fascination and controversy, like the notion that consciousness might arise from quantum processes inside the brain. Among the many attempts to link physics and mind, one proposal stands out for its ambition: the Penrose-Hameroff hypothesis, formally known as orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC-OR. It attempts to bridge the gulf between neuroscience, quantum mechanics, and even the geometry of space-time. While widely debated and still without empirical confirmation, it remains one of the most detailed and theoretically structured efforts to explain awareness using the laws of physics at their deepest level. The story begins with the British mathematician and physicist Sir Roger Penrose, whose work on black holes and general relativity earned him a Nobel Prize. Penrose's interest in consciousness arose not from biology, but from mathematics and logic. He was fascinated by the question of whether the human mind could be fully described by algorithms, whether thought itself could be replicated by a computational machine. In his 1989 book, The Emperor's New Mind, Penrose argued that the answer must be no. His reasoning was rooted in Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which shows that in any formal mathematical system, there are true statements that cannot be proven within that system. Penrose believed that human mathematicians can see the truth of such statements intuitively, suggesting that the mind's reasoning is non-algorithmic and therefore cannot be captured by any computational system. If the mind is not purely computational, then, Penrose reasoned, it must rely on physical processes that go beyond standard computation. Quantum mechanics, with its indeterminacy and non-locality, seemed the only candidate. However, Penrose did not simply invoke randomness. He proposed that consciousness arises from a fundamental process in quantum physics that he called objective reduction. In his interpretation, the collapse of a quantum wave function, the transition from superposition to a definite outcome, is not caused by observation or measurement, as many interpretations suggest. Instead, it occurs spontaneously when a quantum system's superposed states reach a threshold defined by the curvature of spacetime. This means that collapse is an intrinsic feature of the universe, linked to gravity and geometry rather than to measurement. Penrose calculated that each such collapse could represent a discrete event in physical reality, a transition from potentiality to actuality. He speculated that these objective reductions might correspond to moments of conscious experience, implying that awareness is tied to the fabric of the cosmos. But Penrose was a theoretical physicist, not a biologist, and his ideas left open a crucial question. If consciousness involves quantum processes, where in the brain could they occur? And how could they influence neural behavior? That question attracted the attention of Stuart Hameroff, an anesthesiologist and professor at the University of Arizona, who had long studied the cellular basis of consciousness. Hameroff proposed that the site of quantum activity could be the neuron's internal scaffolding, microscopic tubular structures called microtubules. These cylindrical polymers, composed of the protein tubulin, form part of the cytoskeleton that maintains a cell's shape and organizes intracellular transport. They are found throughout the brain in immense numbers, with each neuron containing billions of tubulin dimers. To Hameroff, their geometric order and dynamic behavior made them plausible candidates for coherent information processing at scales smaller than traditional neural networks. Together, Penrose and Hameroff developed the OR model, first published in the mid-1990s. The theory proposes that within microtubules, quantum coherent states can form and persist for brief intervals. These states undergo orchestrated objective reductions. Orchestrated because they are organized by the structure and biochemistry of the neuron, and objective because they collapse according to Penrose's gravitational criterion. Each reduction, they argue, corresponds to a fundamental moment of conscious awareness, while sequences of such events produce the continuous flow of consciousness. In this view, the brain is not merely an information processing computer, but a quantum system embedded in space-time, directly coupled to the universe's most fundamental structure. Consciousness, then, would not be a byproduct of neural computation, but an intrinsic feature of physical reality expressed through the brain's architecture. The boldness of this idea cannot be overstated. It attempts to unite three domains, neuroscience, quantum physics, and gravity, that have so far resisted full unification. If true, OR would mean that consciousness emerges from the very same principles that shape the cosmos. It would also imply that awareness cannot be simulated by classical computation, since quantum collapse is an irreducible physical event. However, the hypothesis faces formidable scientific challenges. The primary objection concerns decoherence, the process by which quantum states interacting with their environment lose coherence almost instantaneously. The warm, wet, and electrically noisy conditions of the brain make it an especially inhospitable environment for quantum coherence. Calculations by physicist Max Tegmark estimated that any quantum superposition inside a neuron would collapse due to thermal interactions in time far shorter than the milliseconds timescale of neural activity. In other words, any delicate quantum effect would vanish before it could influence the brain's classical processes. Hameroff and Penrose have responded to these criticisms by proposing that microtubules may possess mechanisms to shield or preserve coherence. They suggest that ordered water molecules inside the hollow cores of microtubules might create a stable quantum environment, or that vibrational modes within tubulin dimers could synchronize across regions of the brain. They also point to the existence of quantum effects in biological systems once thought impossible, such as the coherence observed in photosynthetic complexes and the quantum sensitivity in avian magnetoreception. These examples demonstrate that nature can sustain quantum behavior in warm environments under certain structural conditions. Still, the analogy remains speculative, and no direct evidence has yet shown that neurons use similar mechanisms for cognition. Experimental tests of OR remain difficult because the predicted quantum events would occur at extremely small scales, far beyond current imaging resolution. Some indirect investigations have sought evidence of unusual electrical oscillations in microtubules or signs of coherence in brain tissue under anesthesia, but the results are preliminary and contentious. Despite decades of discussion, the theory has not yet produced an unambiguous, reproducible experimental signature. Even so, OR has generated valuable dialogue between disciplines that rarely intersect. It has encouraged neuroscientists to examine the subcellular architecture of neurons more closely and inspired physicists to think about how quantum gravity might manifest in biological systems. Whether or not the theory is correct, it reminds science that consciousness might require an explanation that transcends the boundaries between biology and fundamental physics. Critics argue that invoking quantum mechanics is unnecessary and premature. The brain's known classical mechanisms already account for most observed phenomena of cognition, perception, and learning. Consciousness, they contend, can be understood as an emergent property of classical computation in complex neural networks. Introducing quantum physics without empirical necessity risks obscuring rather than clarifying the problem. For many neuroscientists, OR occupies a gray zone between physics and philosophy, fascinating but untested. Nevertheless, the Penrose-Hameroff hypothesis has persisted because it tackles questions that other theories avoid. Traditional neuroscience can describe correlations between brain activity and experience, but struggles to explain why physical processes should generate subjective awareness at all. OR attempts to ground that mystery in the fabric of reality itself. If collapse events are fundamental to the universe, and if the brain can harness them, then consciousness could be as intrinsic as space, time, or energy. This idea aligns loosely with philosophical positions such as panpsychism, which hold that some form of proto-consciousness pervades all matter, though Penrose and Hameroff frame it in strictly physical terms. The gravitational component of OR also links it to cosmology. Penrose has speculated that quantum state reductions could play roles not only in the brain but in cosmic processes, possibly even in the early universe or near black holes where space-time curvature is extreme. Such ideas remain deeply theoretical, yet they reveal the scope of the hypothesis. It seeks to describe consciousness not as an accident of evolution, but as a fundamental aspect of the universe's architecture. If one takes a step back from the controversy, the Penrose-Hameroff model highlights a broader truth about the scientific process. Science progresses not only through confirmed results, but also through bold conjectures that expand the range of questions we are willing to ask. Even if OR is ultimately proven wrong, it forces researchers to articulate precisely why, to refine estimates of decoherence, to explore quantum biology more rigorously, and to clarify the boundaries of classical neuroscience. The debate itself has driven advances in experimental methods and theoretical insight. Some modern research loosely echoes the original spirit of OR without endorsing its specific claims. For instance, quantum information theorists explore how quantum coherence could influence molecular dynamics or enzyme catalysis. Physicists studying quantum gravity continue to investigate whether space-time geometry imposes limits on superposition. These independent lines of inquiry may one day provide the empirical background necessary to evaluate ideas like Penrose and Hameroff's more concretely. Whether or not the brain hosts orchestrated quantum reductions, it is indisputable that consciousness depends on a delicate balance between order and chaos, integration and differentiation, qualities that also characterize quantum systems. The brain is a dynamic structure that constantly oscillates between stability and uncertainty, maintaining coherence over large networks while remaining flexible enough to adapt. In this metaphorical sense, the brain already mirrors the probabilistic nature of the quantum world, even if its computations are classical. To the human imagination, the appeal of or lies partly in its poetry. It suggests that every conscious moment is a small act of cosmic significance, a local manifestation of the universe's underlying quantum geometry. In this vision, to be aware is to participate directly in the unfolding of space-time, as if the fabric of reality becomes momentarily self-aware through the structure of the brain. It transforms consciousness from a byproduct of biology into a fundamental feature of existence. Still, scientific humility reminds us that beauty and truth are not the same. Theories must be judged by evidence, not by elegance. The Penrose Hameroff hypothesis remains speculative until experimental proof can confirm its predictions. Yet even in uncertainty, it serves a valuable role. It keeps open the possibility that consciousness is not confined to the domain of biology, but resonates with the deepest laws of nature. As you let these ideas settle, you might imagine that awareness is more than a product of neural circuitry, that it is a rhythm woven into the universe itself. Whether that rhythm arises from the vibration of microtubules or from the dance of countless classical neurons, it speaks of the same mystery. The universe has found a way to know itself. You are that knowing, a fleeting pattern of matter and light reflecting on the whole. For a moment, allow that thought to soften. Beneath the debates, the mathematics, and the competing models lies something simple, the direct experience of being. Whether consciousness comes from quantum gravity or biochemical complexity, its presence is undeniable. It is the quiet observer through which the cosmos awakens to its own existence, one flicker of awareness at a time. Chapter 5. Quantum Biology, Life's Hidden Coherence. When physicists first developed quantum mechanics, it was meant to describe the behavior of electrons, atoms, and subatomic particles. Living organisms, by contrast, were thought to be far too warm, complex, and noisy for quantum effects to survive. Biological systems seemed the very opposite of the isolated, low-temperature environments required to preserve coherence and superposition. For decades, scientists assumed that life operated entirely within the realm of classical physics, that quantum behavior averaged out long before reaching the messy scale of biochemistry. Yet over the last 2 decades, evidence has begun to challenge this assumption. A new field known as quantum biology has emerged, exploring how living organisms might not only tolerate quantum effects, but harness them for survival. The possibility that biology could exploit quantum mechanics is astonishing because quantum phenomena are exquisitely delicate. When a quantum system interacts with its surroundings, coherence, the property that allows it to exist in multiple states at once, rapidly collapses. In typical biological conditions, such as the interior of a cell at body temperature, decoherence would be expected to occur in less than a trillionth of a second. Nevertheless, experiments have shown that certain biological processes maintain quantum correlations long enough to have functional consequences. Life, it seems, may have evolved mechanisms to preserve and use coherence even in the turbulent environment of living matter. One of the most striking examples comes from photosynthesis, the process by which plants, algae, and certain bacteria capture sunlight and convert it into chemical energy. Within the photosynthetic apparatus, light is absorbed by pigments in complexes called antennae, where the energy must then be transferred efficiently to a reaction center that drives chemical conversion. For decades, scientists described this energy transfer using classical models, the excitation energy hops randomly between molecules like a ball bouncing through a network. But in the early 2000s, ultra-fast spectroscopy revealed something remarkable. When light interacts with these complexes, the resulting electronic excitations exhibit oscillations consistent with quantum coherence. In other words, the energy does not merely hop, it explores multiple pathways simultaneously, as if the system is sampling all possible routes to the reaction center before choosing the most efficient one. These experiments, first conducted on photosynthetic bacteria and later on plant complexes, such as the Fenner-Matthews-Olson FMO complex, demonstrated coherence lasting for hundreds of femtoseconds, surprisingly long in biological terms. Although extremely brief, that duration is enough to enhance energy transfer efficiency. Quantum coherence allows excitons, the quasi-particles representing energy excitations, to interfere constructively along the fastest paths and destructively along slower ones, funneling energy toward the reaction center with near-perfect precision. The result is that photosynthesis, one of the most fundamental processes sustaining life on Earth, may rely on quantum optimization to capture and use sunlight. Another intriguing case involves the navigation abilities of migratory birds. Certain species can sense Earth's magnetic field and use it to orient themselves during long migrations, even across continents and oceans. For decades, this magnetoreception was a mystery. The magnetic field of Earth is extremely weak, far too weak to directly influence neuronal activity or to mechanically align molecular structures. The leading explanation today invokes quantum entanglement. According to this hypothesis, birds possess specialized photoreceptor proteins called cryptochromes in their retinas. When these molecules absorb blue light, they form pairs of radicals, molecules with unpaired electrons, whose spins are quantum mechanically entangled. The relative spin orientations of these radicals determine how they recombine, and the outcome is subtly influenced by Earth's magnetic field. This means that the chemistry of vision itself may be modulated by quantum spin dynamics, giving the bird a sense of magnetic direction that changes with the angle of its head relative to the field. Experimental evidence supports several aspects of this model. Cryptochromes have been identified in the eyes of migratory birds, and light-dependent magnetoreception disappears when these molecules are inactivated. In vitro studies show that entangled radical pairs can remain coherent for microseconds, remarkably long by quantum standards, suggesting that biological systems can indeed preserve spin coherence long enough to affect chemical reactions. The radical pair mechanism is now considered one of the most plausible examples of quantum biology in action, showing that quantum effects can extend far beyond physics laboratories and into the nervous systems of living animals. Quantum phenomena may also play a role in enzymatic catalysis, the chemical backbone of life. Enzymes accelerate reactions by lowering their activation energy, often by factors of millions. For years, this was explained in purely classical terms through mechanical stabilization of transition states. However, growing evidence indicates that some enzymes facilitate quantum tunneling, a process in which particles such as protons or electrons pass through energy barriers rather than going over them. In tunneling, a particle behaves as a wave, allowing it to penetrate regions that would be forbidden by classical energy constraints. Experiments on enzymes like alcohol dehydrogenase and hydrogen transfer systems show temperature dependencies and kinetic isotope effects, that cannot be explained without including quantum tunneling. Life appears to use this effect routinely, allowing reactions to occur at biological temperatures that would otherwise require immense energy input. Even the human sense of smell might involve quantum principles. Traditional theories of olfaction hold that receptors in the nose detect the shapes of odorant molecules, like keys fitting into locks. Yet this model struggles to explain why molecules of nearly identical shape can smell completely different, or why isotopic substitutions, replacing hydrogen atoms with heavier deuterium, sometimes change perceived odor. One alternative proposal suggests that olfactory receptors detect molecular vibrations via inelastic electron tunneling. According to this theory, an electron moves across the receptor only if the energy difference matches the vibrational frequency of the odorant molecule, effectively listening to its quantum vibration. While this idea remains debated, some experiments have shown results consistent with vibration-based discrimination, hinting again that biology might be sensitive to quantum-level details. What unites these diverse cases, photosynthesis, magnetoreception, tunneling, and possibly olfaction, is the idea that evolution has not merely tolerated quantum effects, but has integrated them into biological function. Quantum coherence, entanglement, and tunneling provide efficiency, sensitivity, and adaptability that classical processes alone could not achieve. This challenges long-standing assumptions about the separation between quantum physics and the macroscopic world of life. Rather than being incompatible, the two realms appear to intertwine in subtle and remarkable ways. These discoveries also reshape how scientists think about the boundary between the quantum and classical domains. Traditionally, that boundary was seen as absolute. Quantum phenomena occurred only in isolated systems at near-zero temperatures, while living systems belonged squarely to the classical world. Quantum biology suggests that the boundary is negotiable, that under certain structural and dynamical conditions, coherence can persist and even thrive amid noise. Instead of being destroyed by interaction with the environment, quantum effects can sometimes use that very interaction constructively, maintaining delicate correlations through a balance between coherence and decoherence. In this sense, life may exist in a regime optimized not for maximum isolation, but for controlled openness, where quantum information is neither fully preserved nor immediately lost. Understanding how organisms achieve this balance is a major frontier of research. Some scientists propose that biological systems operate near what is called the quantum critical point, a regime between order and disorder where fluctuations enhance sensitivity. In photosynthesis, for example, the coupling between pigments and surrounding vibrations, known as phonons, may help sustain coherence by synchronizing energy transfer rather than disrupting it. This concept of noise-assisted transport turns the traditional view on its head. Environmental noise, rather than being an obstacle, becomes an integral component of quantum efficiency. Beyond these specific examples, quantum biology raises philosophical questions about the nature of life itself. If living systems rely on quantum effects, then the boundary between matter and life may be less distinct than once believed. At the molecular level, all life is built from quantum matter, atoms and electrons obeying quantum laws. The mystery is not that quantum mechanics appears in biology, but that life seems to have evolved ways to harness it purposefully. This implies that evolution has, in a sense, discovered quantum strategies through natural selection, long before humans learned to exploit them in technology. Quantum biology also has profound implications for medicine and neuroscience. If quantum coherence influences processes like photosynthesis or enzyme dynamics, similar principles could underlie aspects of cellular communication or energy regulation in the human body. Some researchers speculate that microtubules, the same structures invoked in the Penrose Hameroff model, might display collective vibrational modes influenced by quantum mechanics. Though there is no evidence that these effects contribute directly to consciousness, their possible role in cellular organization remains an open question. Another frontier lies in quantum genetics, the study of how quantum tunneling might affect DNA. Proton tunneling between nucleotide bases can lead to rare tautomeric shifts, potentially causing spontaneous mutations. These quantum events, though exceedingly small, could influence genetic variability and evolution over long timescales. Thus, quantum processes might subtly shape the trajectory of life itself, introducing randomness and creativity into the machinery of heredity. Despite these tantalizing possibilities, quantum biology is still a young and cautious discipline. Many early claims have been revised or refined as experimental techniques improved. The challenge lies in distinguishing genuine quantum effects from classical analogs or statistical noise. Biological systems are complex, and it is easy to misinterpret signals as evidence of coherence or entanglement. Rigorous testing and replication are essential. Yet even conservative interpretations affirm that quantum mechanics plays a more pervasive role in biology than once imagined. The growing dialogue between physicists and biologists has already produced technological inspiration. Quantum biology's insights into coherence and energy transfer are guiding the design of more efficient solar cells and biomimetic materials. Studies of radical pair chemistry inform research in quantum sensing and magnetometry. Life, by using quantum mechanics naturally, provides a model for technologies humans are only beginning to master. In a broader sense, quantum biology reveals a universe where the divide between physics and life is an illusion. The same principles that govern subatomic particles also govern metabolism, perception, and even migration across oceans. Life is not a separate exception to quantum law, but one of its most intricate expressions. From this perspective, organisms can be viewed as self-organizing quantum systems, evolved to maintain coherence in a chaotic world. As we step back, an existential realization emerges. The same quantum fluctuations that gave rise to stars and galaxies also underlie the photosynthetic reactions that feed our planet and the neuronal impulses that sustain thought. The boundary between physics and biology, between inanimate matter and living awareness, dissolves into a continuum. You are not separate from the quantum world. You are one of its coherent patterns, sustained across scales and time. When you take a quiet breath, every molecule of oxygen you draw in has followed paths governed by quantum probabilities. Each photon striking your retina carries the memory of coherence from a distant star. The life that animates you is not a rebellion against physics, but its most delicate achievement. A symphony of order sustained amid uncertainty. You can let that thought settle gently. Beneath the noise of existence, there is coherence. Beneath the complexity of life, there is a rhythm shared with the atoms and the cosmos. The same quantum laws that shimmer in the darkness of space pulse quietly within every living cell. In that realization, the distance between you and the universe disappears, leaving only the wonder of being part of life's hidden coherence. Chapter 6. The Brain as a Quantum Information Processor. At first glance, the idea that the human brain might process information in a quantum way seems implausible. The brain is warm, wet, and noisy, conditions hostile to the fragile coherence that quantum systems require. Quantum computers in laboratories operate near absolute zero to preserve superposition and entanglement. Neurons, by contrast, fire through electrochemical reactions surrounded by constant molecular motion. Yet a growing body of research at the intersection of physics, neuroscience, and information theory suggests that even if the brain is not a quantum computer in the strict sense, quantum principles might provide insight into how it manages the extraordinary complexity of thought and perception. The concept of the brain as a quantum information processor extends beyond literal quantum computation. It invites us to ask whether the logic of quantum mechanics, its probabilistic nature, nonlinearity, and contextuality might describe cognition better than classical models can. Information lies at the core of both physics and neuroscience. In classical terms, the brain processes information through electrical signals transmitted between neurons. These signals encode patterns representing sensory input, memory, or planned actions. The structure and dynamics of the neural network determine how this information flows and transforms. This view, though powerful, still frames cognition as a sequence of discrete deterministic computations, like a biological computer. But human thought does not always behave deterministically. Decisions, perceptions, and memories are fluid, context-dependent, and often non-logical in the classical sense. Cognitive scientists have long observed that people violate classical probability rules when making choices, an effect known as quantum-like cognition. In this framework, quantum theory becomes a metaphorical tool, not because the brain literally maintains quantum coherence, but because the mathematics of quantum probability describes human decision-making more accurately than classical statistics do. In quantum probability theory, outcomes do not have fixed probabilities independent of context. Instead, the act of measurement, or in cognitive terms, the act of asking a question or focusing attention, changes the probability distribution. The interference of mental superpositions can lead to outcomes that would be impossible under classical rules. For example, when asked sequential questions, people's answers often depend on the order of the questions, echoing how measurement order affects results in quantum mechanics. This suggests that the brain's informational logic may be inherently contextual and dynamic, much like a quantum system's. Beyond analogy, there are more literal possibilities. Some researchers speculate that microscopic quantum processes might influence brain function indirectly. Ion channels in neurons are small enough that tunneling effects could affect how electrical signals begin or propagate. Molecular vibrations in proteins or neurotransmitters could exhibit coherence over short timescales, modulating signaling at the chemical level. Though these effects may not create macroscopic quantum states, they could add an element of probabilistic variability that contributes to the brain's adaptability and unpredictability. Such quantum noise, filtered through nonlinear network dynamics, might enhance creativity or sensitivity to small perturbations. The concept of quantum information offers a deeper layer of interpretation. In quantum physics, information is not merely an abstract record of states. It is a physical quantity. Every particle carries information encoded in its quantum state, and the universe itself can be described as an evolving informational structure. If the brain is a device built by the universe to process and integrate information, then it inevitably inherits the same physical foundations. Consciousness, under this view, could be the manifestation of information processing at the highest level of complexity, where patterns of quantum and classical information combine to form coherent awareness. Quantum information theory differs from classical information theory in fundamental ways. In classical systems, information is encoded in bits, definite values of 0 or 1. In quantum systems, it is encoded in qubits, which can exist in superpositions of both states simultaneously. This allows quantum systems to represent and process exponentially more information in parallel. The brain, while not known to sustain coherent qubits, does appear to handle enormous amounts of information simultaneously. At any given moment, billions of neurons and trillions of synapses are active, generating dynamic patterns that evolve across multiple timescales. The efficiency with which the brain integrates sensory input, memory, and emotion might resemble the parallelism of quantum computation at an abstract level. From this perspective, quantum brain does not mean that neurons are literally entangled particles, but that the brain's architecture may reflect similar informational principles: distributed representation, interference between alternatives, and contextual dependence. Cognitive states may act like probability waves that collapse into definite perceptions or decisions under observation or focus. Attention, then, could be analogous to a measurement that resolves uncertainty into experience. These parallels are not proof of quantum computation, but conceptual bridges between two domains that share underlying mathematics. Experimental neuroscience increasingly points to information integration as the defining feature of consciousness. The brain's activity cannot be localized to a single region or frequency band. Instead, consciousness corresponds to dynamic connectivity, linking widespread areas into a unified yet differentiated whole. Quantum information theory also emphasizes the interplay between integration and differentiation. Entanglement links systems together, while measurement separates them. Both domains reveal that information gains meaning through relationships rather than isolated bits. This resemblance may explain why quantum theory serves as such a powerful metaphor for understanding cognition. A few speculative models go further, proposing that certain biological structures could maintain transient quantum coherence. Some microtubule models, though controversial, suggest that vibrational modes of tubulin proteins could couple coherently across neurons for brief intervals. If that were true, these vibrations might serve as subneuronal channels of communication, supplementing classical synaptic transmission with quantum-level coordination. Although no experimental confirmation exists, the idea has inspired new research into quantum vibrations in biological macromolecules, not necessarily as mechanisms of consciousness, but as indicators that biology can access quantum resources. Even without coherence, quantum information concepts are reshaping how researchers think about brain computation. Theories of predictive coding describe the brain as an inferential engine that constantly updates a probabilistic model of the world. In these models, every perception is a balance between prior expectations and incoming sensory evidence, a process mathematically similar to the updating of quantum states upon measurement. The brain does not store a fixed image of reality. It continually reconstructs it, guided by probabilities. This alignment between probabilistic inference and quantum formalism may be more than coincidence. Both suggest that uncertainty is not a flaw, but an essential feature of intelligent systems. At the molecular level, some processes involved in cognition are known to be sensitive to quantum effects, even if only briefly. Electron transfer in mitochondrial respiration, for instance, involves tunneling phenomena that contribute to energy efficiency. Neurotransmitter dynamics in synaptic vesicles might also depend on quantum probabilities of molecular interaction. These are not yet connected to consciousness, but illustrate that quantum processes are embedded throughout biological systems. The question is not whether quantum physics operates in the brain. It must, because everything does. But whether these effects influence cognition in ways beyond random noise. If one accepts that the brain is fundamentally an information processing system built from quantum matter, then its classical and quantum aspects may form a continuum. The brain could operate near the boundary where microscopic quantum fluctuations influence macroscopic neural dynamics. Such sensitivity might help explain the brain's combination of reliability and flexibility. A purely deterministic system would be rigid and predictable, while a purely random one would be chaotic. The brain sits between these extremes, stable enough to sustain identity, yet fluid enough to learn and create. This balance echoes the quantum world's own mixture of determinism and probability. Quantum information theory also introduces the notion of entanglement as a resource for correlation without communication. Some physicists have speculated, cautiously, that analogous patterns of correlation could emerge in neural networks through synchronization and feedback, creating functional, entanglement-like relationships across distant brain regions. Though purely metaphorical, this analogy captures a real property of consciousness, the integration of distributed information into a unified experience. Your perception of a scene, for example, binds color, shape, motion, and emotion into one coherent moment despite being processed in separate cortical areas. This unity, so central to consciousness, resembles the holistic nature of quantum systems, where the whole cannot be reduced to its parts. The implications reach beyond neuroscience. If information is physical, as modern physics asserts, then consciousness might be viewed as the highest expression of information organization in the known universe. The same principles that govern quantum communication in particles could, at larger scales, manifest as cognitive coherence in brains. Awareness would then represent the universe's way of processing itself, the informational feedback loop through which the cosmos becomes self-referential. This is not a mystical claim, but a reflection of the continuity between matter, energy, and information. Practically, exploring the brain through the lens of quantum information could inspire new computational paradigms. Quantum algorithms exploit superposition to explore multiple possibilities simultaneously and interference to converge on optimal solutions. Similarly, the brain appears to evaluate possibilities in parallel, discarding some pathways and amplifying others based on context. Machine learning models inspired by this logic, blending classical and quantum concepts, are already emerging. These systems aim not to replicate consciousness, but to mimic the brain's remarkable ability to extract meaning from uncertainty. It remains crucial to separate metaphor from mechanism. There is currently no direct evidence that quantum coherence, entanglement, or wave function collapse plays a functional role in thought. The measurable behavior of neurons can be explained using classical biophysics, and consciousness correlates with macroscopic network dynamics rather than microscopic events. The value of the quantum information perspective lies less in proving the brain is a quantum computer and more in reframing how we think about intelligence, uncertainty, and the structure of reality. In the end, the brain processes information using the same laws that govern the rest of the universe. Whether its computations rely on quantum coherence or on emergent classical dynamics built from quantum matter, the distinction may be less profound than it seems. Every thought, every perception is a transformation of quantum information through biological structure. The same principles that describe electrons and photons describe the atoms of your neurons, and through them, the patterns of your mind. Perhaps consciousness, in its deepest sense, is what happens when information organizes itself so completely that it begins to model its own existence. The brain, as a quantum information processor, could be the universe's most intricate experiment in self-awareness, a system that not only calculates reality but experiences it. You can imagine, then, that every act of perception is a kind of measurement, collapsing possibilities into the present moment. Your awareness threads through countless potential worlds, stabilizing one version long enough for you to call it now. And yet, beneath this apparent solidity, the probabilities continue to shimmer. The quantum fabric that shapes the cosmos also shapes the thoughts with which you wonder about it. As you let this thought drift, you might feel a quiet continuity between your own mind and the universe that gave rise to it. The information that once existed as scattered particles now reflects upon itself as consciousness. In that realization, there is both humility and wonder. You are not separate from the quantum flow of reality. You are one of its fleeting computations, aware for a moment of being. Chapter 7. Observation, Collapse, and the Role of the Mind. No concept in modern physics has generated more philosophical tension than the idea of wave function collapse. It is the point where probability meets actuality, where a quantum system that existed in many possible states appears to choose one. In the laboratory, collapse seems straightforward. When a detector measures an electron's position, it registers a definite result. Yet, what actually causes this reduction from superposition to certainty remains one of the deepest mysteries in science. Does measurement simply reveal what was already there, or does it in some sense create the outcome? And if observation plays a role in shaping reality, what does that say about the mind, the ultimate observer? In classical physics, the act of measurement was passive. One could, at least in principle, measure without changing the system being studied. But in quantum mechanics, observation is unavoidably participatory. To measure the position of a particle, for example, one must interact with it using light or another form of energy, disturbing its state. This is not merely a technical limitation. It is a fundamental feature of the theory. A quantum system evolves smoothly and deterministically according to the Schrödinger equation, but when measured, its wave function abruptly collapses to a specific outcome with a certain probability. The mechanism of that collapse is not described by the equation itself. It is an additional postulate, a rule inserted to reconcile the mathematical formalism with what we actually observe. This discrepancy gives rise to what is called the measurement problem, the tension between the deterministic evolution of quantum systems and the apparent indeterminism of observation. The question is not simply philosophical. It lies at the foundation of how we understand reality. If the world follows quantum rules, then what constitutes a measurement? Is it the act of recording data, the interaction with a macroscopic device, or the conscious registration of a result by an observer? In the early development of quantum mechanics, Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg of the Copenhagen School emphasized the inseparability of system and observer. They argued that quantum properties do not exist in definite form until they are measured, and that physics should restrict itself to predicting outcomes of experiments rather than speculating about an underlying reality. According to this interpretation, quantum theory does not describe how nature is, but how it behaves when we ask it questions. The act of observation defines the framework within which physical quantities become meaningful. Albert Einstein, among others, found this unsatisfying. Do you really believe the moon is not there when you are not looking at it? He famously asked. To Einstein, the notion that observation creates reality seemed to undermine the objectivity of nature. He believed that quantum mechanics was incomplete, that hidden variables might exist to restore determinism. But experiments inspired by John Bell's theorem have consistently supported the quantum view. The correlations predicted by quantum mechanics and confirmed in the laboratory cannot be explained by local hidden variables. The data suggests that reality at its deepest level may not be composed of definite properties independent of measurement, but of probabilities that crystallize into facts only through interaction. Still, what precisely constitutes this interaction remains an open question. One line of interpretation, called decoherence theory, explains the appearance of collapse without invoking consciousness. When a quantum system interacts with its environment, its delicate superpositions become entangled with countless degrees of freedom. Interference between different outcomes becomes practically impossible, and the system appears classical. Decoherence does not truly eliminate superpositions. It merely hides them within the enormous complexity of the environment. From our limited perspective, this looks like collapse. The universe, under this view, contains no special boundary between quantum and classical. Everything evolves quantum mechanically, but macroscopic systems are too entangled to reveal their quantum nature. While decoherence solves many practical problems, it does not explain why we observe a single outcome rather than a mixture of possibilities. The wave function of the universe still contains all alternatives. We simply experience one branch. The many worlds interpretation of Hugh Everett takes this idea literally. It holds that all possible outcomes of a quantum event actually occur, each in its own branch of a vast, ever-dividing multiverse. Observation does not collapse reality, it splits it. Each observer becomes entangled with a particular outcome, perceiving only one version of the whole. This interpretation preserves the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics, but at the cost of multiplying realities beyond comprehension. Between these extremes lies the question of the observer's role. Some interpretations, including older ones proposed by John von Neumann and Eugene Wigner, suggest that consciousness might play a special part in collapse. Von Neumann pointed out that the boundary between quantum and classical systems can, in principle, be moved arbitrarily. One can treat the measuring device itself as part of the quantum system, entangled with the object being measured. If everything follows the same quantum rules, where does the chain of measurement end? Von Neumann concluded that it terminates only when the result enters the consciousness of an observer. Wigner went further, arguing that the conscious mind might be the agent that reduces possibilities to a single reality. This consciousness causes collapse idea is provocative but controversial. It does not imply that human thought magically controls reality. Rather, it suggests that consciousness is the final step in the measurement chain, the point where physical processes become definite experiences. Critics counter that this interpretation shifts the problem rather than solving it. It replaces the mystery of collapse with the mystery of consciousness itself. Moreover, experiments have shown that measurement outcomes become fixed long before any conscious observer sees them. Detectors register events and record data independently of human attention. Consciousness, therefore, is not required to cause collapse in the practical sense. Yet even if the mind does not directly influence quantum events, the philosophical implications remain intriguing. Observation in physics is an exchange of information, an interaction that changes both system and observer. Consciousness as we know it is also a continual process of information exchange between organism and environment. The parallel is tempting. Both involve the transformation of potentiality into experience, the reduction of uncertainty into knowledge. Whether or not the brain operates quantum mechanically, the act of awareness mirrors the logic of measurement. By focusing attention, we bring one possibility into the foreground while countless others fade into the background. Recent experiments have deepened the enigma. In delayed choice and quantum eraser setups, researchers have shown that the decision of how to measure a particle can seemingly affect its past behavior. In these experiments, whether a particle acts like a wave or a particle depends on how it is measured, and the choice of measurement can be made after the particle has passed through the apparatus. The results do not imply retrocausality in a literal sense, but they demonstrate that quantum systems do not possess definite properties until measurement contextualizes them. The present choice defines what can meaningfully be said about the past. Reality, it appears, is not a fixed timeline, but a web of interactions that gain definition only when observed. Philosophers and physicists have wrestled with the implications for decades. If observation plays such a central role, does that mean the universe is participatory? John Archibald Wheeler, one of the architects of modern quantum theory, proposed a striking idea known as the participatory universe. He suggested that observers are essential components of the cosmos, that the universe requires conscious beings to bring it into definite existence. This does not mean reality did not exist before life arose, but rather that meaning and measurement, the capacity to define events, are inseparable from observation. In Wheeler's vision, the universe evolves observers who, in turn, define the universe. From a more cautious scientific standpoint, most physicists view collapse as a physical process that occurs through interaction, not awareness. Consciousness may not cause collapse, but it shares a deep structural resonance with it. Both involve transitions from uncertainty to certainty, from potential to actual. When you open your eyes and perceive the world, your brain resolves ambiguous sensory input into coherent experience. The process by which neurons settle on one interpretation among many possible ones parallels, metaphorically, the way a quantum system resolves into a single outcome. This analogy is not evidence of quantum consciousness, but a reminder that the principles of physics and the structure of cognition are intertwined at the level of information. Understanding this connection requires humility. Quantum mechanics describes physical phenomena with unmatched accuracy, yet its interpretation remains open. Consciousness, too, is empirically undeniable, yet theoretically elusive. When the two mysteries meet, it is easy to slide into speculation. The task for science is to distinguish metaphor from mechanism, to explore whether the resemblance between observation in physics and awareness in psychology is purely formal or reveals a deeper unity. Even if the mind does not collapse wave functions, it participates in the act of measurement in a broader sense. Every scientific experiment, every data point, arises within a framework of interpretation shaped by consciousness. Observation is not a neutral window onto reality. It is a relationship between observer and observed. The universe we know is the universe we can measure, describe, and think about. In this sense, the mind and the cosmos are not independent entities, but complementary aspects of a single unfolding process. Some physicists suspect that the resolution to the measurement problem may come from a deeper theory that unites quantum mechanics with gravity. Objective collapse models, such as those proposed by Penrose, suggest that superpositions spontaneously reduce when they involve enough mass or energy to significantly distort spacetime. If such processes occur, then collapse would be a real physical event rather than a consequence of observation. Experiments are underway to test these ideas by measuring the behavior of increasingly large quantum systems. Whether these tests confirm or refute objective reduction, they promise to illuminate the transition between quantum potential and classical reality. A transition that every conscious moment seems to mirror metaphorically. For now, what can be said with certainty is that quantum mechanics forces us to reconsider the notion of objectivity. Observation does not stand apart from reality, but is woven into its fabric. The world is not a static collection of things waiting to be seen. It is an evolving network of interactions that become meaningful through observation. In that sense, the mind's role is not to collapse reality, but to participate in it, to weave its own strand into the cosmic web of measurement and meaning. When you pause to notice the sound of your breath or the faint hum of distant traffic, you are performing an act of observation, not of electrons or photons, but of your own moment within the universe. Just as the quantum world requires interaction to define its state, awareness requires engagement to bring experience into being. The boundary between observer and observed blurs. The same universe that you observe is also the one that allows you to observe. Let that realization linger. Every moment of awareness is a meeting point between potential and actuality, between what could be and what is. You are not outside the universe looking in. You are a locus of observation through which the universe comes to know itself. Whether or not consciousness plays a literal role in quantum collapse, it mirrors the same profound principle. Reality is not complete without participation. And so, as the night quiets and thoughts begin to slow, it becomes clear that the act of noticing, of being aware at all, is itself a kind of cosmic event. Through you, probabilities condense into the present. The universe observes itself, softly and fleetingly through the window of your mind. Chapter 8. Entangled Minds and the Collective Quantum Self. Among the most mysterious and counterintuitive features of quantum mechanics is entanglement, the phenomenon in which two or more particles become linked in such a way that their properties are correlated, no matter how far apart they are in space. When one is measured, the other's state is determined instantly, as though distance no longer mattered. This connection does not transmit information faster than light, but it does reveal that at the quantum level, the universe cannot be divided cleanly into independent parts. Reality is, in some fundamental sense, relational. Everything that exists is entangled with something else. When this concept first emerged in the 1930s, it was viewed as a paradox. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, suspecting it revealed a flaw in quantum theory. But decades of experiments, from the early work of Alain Aspect in the 1980s to modern tests closing every conceivable loophole, have confirmed that entanglement is real. Nature behaves as quantum mechanics predicts, even when the correlations defy classical logic. The universe, at its base, is not a collection of separate entities, but a network of intertwined probabilities. In recent years, this insight has begun to influence how scientists and philosophers think about consciousness. If the fundamental fabric of the universe is entangled, could the same principle extend to the systems that emerge within it, including living beings, brains, and perhaps even minds? The question is not whether human consciousness literally shares entangled particles across brains, but whether entanglement provides a model for the deep interdependence between observers, experiences, and information. It opens the possibility that consciousness, rather than being an isolated property of individuals, may have a collective or relational aspect grounded in the physics of connection itself. At first, this might seem like a leap beyond what science can support. There is currently no evidence that human minds are quantum entangled in the physical sense. Entanglement is fragile. It typically exists in controlled laboratory conditions and decays rapidly when systems interact with their environments. The brain, with its warmth and noise, is not an ideal medium for maintaining quantum correlations over macroscopic distances. However, entanglement is not confined to small scales alone. In principle, it underlies all interactions in nature, linking every particle to every other through shared histories. From that perspective, all matter, including biological matter, is part of a vast, interconnected field of quantum relationships. Some researchers in quantum information theory have explored the possibility that entanglement could play a role in biological systems indirectly. For instance, in photosynthesis and magnetoreception, discussed earlier, coherent quantum states appear to facilitate energy transfer and sensitivity to weak magnetic fields. These examples do not involve communication across distance, but rather correlations maintained within a single organism. They demonstrate that life can exploit quantum connectivity under the right conditions. If such coherence can occur in molecules, could similar principles support synchronization across neurons, or even across different brains during social interaction? This question leads to a frontier, sometimes called quantum neurodynamics. Though still highly speculative, it explores whether brain processes might involve transient entangled states that enhance coordination between distant regions. The idea is not that thoughts travel instantaneously between people, but that the same quantum principles governing coherence in physical systems might explain certain forms of interpersonal synchrony, such as empathy, collective attention, or shared emotion. Neuroscience has already demonstrated that when two people communicate deeply or engage in cooperative tasks, their brain activity patterns can align in measurable ways, a phenomenon known as interbrain synchrony. Functional magnetic resonance imaging and electroencephalography show that neural oscillations between interacting individuals can become phase-locked, as if both brains are parts of one larger system exchanging information. This synchrony can be explained entirely within classical physics through sensory feedback, mirror neuron systems, and social cognition. But it also evokes a conceptual parallel to entanglement. Two systems, through interaction, become correlated in a way that cannot be fully reduced to the behavior of either one alone. In quantum mechanics, entanglement means that measuring one particle provides information about another, regardless of distance. In human terms, shared understanding or empathy might represent a macroscopic analog, a synchronization of internal states arising from communication and shared experience. While this resemblance is metaphorical rather than literal, it highlights an essential truth. Consciousness is not purely individual. It is relational, arising through connection. Information theory provides a bridge between these domains. In both physics and neuroscience, information is what links parts into wholes. In quantum systems, information is encoded not only in individual particles, but in the correlations between them. In the brain, information resides not merely in the firing of individual neurons, but in the patterns of relationships across networks. Conscious experience, the unity of perception, memory, and self, depends on the integration of vast amounts of distributed information. Entanglement, as a physical principle, is the most fundamental expression of integration known in nature. It shows that the state of a whole cannot be understood by examining its parts in isolation. The same may be true of the mind. Some theorists have suggested that consciousness itself could be viewed as a form of informational entanglement, not necessarily quantum in a physical sense, but structurally analogous. When you are aware of something, countless neural processes become correlated, binding sensory input, memory, and emotion into a unified experience. This coherence within the brain mirrors, on a different scale, the coherence that entanglement produces in physical systems. Both involve a transition from independent elements to an inseparable whole. Even in social and cultural contexts, a similar principle seems to operate. Human communication allows information to flow between minds, creating shared understanding that transcends any one individual. Language, art, and collective memory function as mechanisms of entanglement at the cognitive level. The exchange of ideas links consciousnesses together, weaving a network of meaning across humanity. This collective connectivity might not involve quantum correlations in the strict physical sense, but it expresses the same logic of interdependence that quantum theory reveals at the microcosmic level. From a purely scientific standpoint, it is important to maintain caution. There is no empirical evidence that mental states are connected through quantum entanglement, or that consciousness can affect distant systems non-locally. Experiments claiming evidence of entangled consciousness or mind-matter correlations across distance have not withstood rigorous scrutiny. However, the fact that entanglement challenges classical notions of separability continues to inspire questions about the unity of consciousness and the apparent connectedness of subjective experience. In physics, entanglement is now understood not as a mystical property, but as the fundamental currency of quantum information. Quantum computers exploit entanglement to perform operations across multiple qubits simultaneously. Quantum communication protocols use it to achieve unbreakable encryption. In these contexts, entanglement represents shared information across space without direct exchange, correlation without transmission. In a metaphorical sense, consciousness operates in a similar way. Mental states arise from distributed correlations rather than from single, localized causes. Philosophically, this resonates with a view of the universe as a holistic system, where separateness is an illusion of scale. The classical world we perceive is composed of well-defined objects with boundaries, but the quantum world underneath is one of continuous connection. Each atom in your body was once part of ancient stars, entangled with matter that now forms distant galaxies. The particles composing your brain are not isolated. They share a history stretching back to the birth of the universe. If entanglement is the rule, then individuality is a temporary pattern in a larger field of relations. In the realm of neuroscience, this perspective dovetails with the growing recognition that consciousness is not located in a single point of the brain, but arises from distributed networks. The sense of self, the I that experiences, emerges from the coordination of many regions, each contributing to the ongoing construction of perception and identity. Just as entangled particles lose independent descriptions, the neurons contributing to conscious experience are inseparable from the patterns they form together. The unity of awareness may therefore be a manifestation of the same relational principle that governs the quantum world. Some researchers in theoretical physics and consciousness studies have proposed that information itself, rather than matter, might be the fundamental substrate of the universe. In this framework, known as digital or informational realism, particles and fields are expressions of underlying informational relationships. Consciousness, as an informational process, would naturally fit into this picture, not as something added to matter, but as an intrinsic feature of how the universe organizes information. Entanglement would then be not just a property of particles, but a reflection of the universe's informational unity, which consciousness echoes in subjective experience. Such ideas remain speculative, but they point toward a possible synthesis between physics and philosophy. If reality is an informational network in which everything is correlated, then consciousness might be the most refined form of that network's self-organization. An emergent phenomenon that mirrors the interconnectedness of its own physical substrate. The collective quantum self would not be a mystical hive mind, but the recognition that awareness, individuality, and communication are expressions of one underlying unity. From a more grounded biological perspective, the concept of interconnected minds already has tangible meaning. Social neuroscience shows that human empathy, cooperation, and morality depend on deeply rooted neural mechanisms that evolved to connect individuals. Mirror neurons allow us to simulate others' actions and emotions internally, creating shared experiences. Language allows minds to align their internal representations, forming collective knowledge systems. These mechanisms demonstrate that the self is not sealed off from others, but shaped continuously through interaction. While these processes operate on classical scales, they reflect the same fundamental truth that physics reveals at the quantum level. Relationships, not isolated entities, define the structure of reality. If we follow this thread to its philosophical conclusion, the boundaries between individual minds and the cosmos blur. Each conscious being represents a local manifestation of a universal process of awareness. The sense of individuality is real and meaningful, but also partial, a temporary organization of matter and information within a greater whole. When you look at another person, exchange a thought, or share an emotion, what occurs is not merely communication between separate entities, but the meeting of patterns within a single interconnected system. From this viewpoint, entanglement becomes more than a physical curiosity. It becomes a metaphor for the unity underlying experience itself. The cosmos, through its quantum fabric, does not separate completely into parts. It remains bound together through shared histories and correlations. Consciousness, as a phenomenon emerging from that fabric, inherits the same tendency toward connection. The collective quantum self is not a mystical being, but a recognition that awareness, in all its forms, participates in the same universal coherence that binds atoms and galaxies. As science continues to explore these frontiers, it is important to maintain both rigor and wonder. Entanglement is an empirical fact. Collective consciousness remains a hypothesis. But even as metaphor, the idea that minds are connected through language, empathy, and shared existence reminds us that we are not isolated observers of the universe, but expressions of its continuity. As you reflect on this, consider that every atom in your body was once entangled with others across the stars. The same quantum fields that shape distant galaxies weave through the space between you and everything you perceive. In this vast network of relations, awareness becomes the universe's way of recognizing its own connectivity. You are both observer and participant, node and field, separate and one. Let that realization rest quietly. Beneath individuality lies communion. Beneath the chatter of thought lies resonance. You are not apart from the universe, nor from others. You are an instance of its entangled mind, a fleeting coherence in the cosmic field of awareness. And in that awareness, the universe briefly knows itself, not as a collection of particles, but as a single, boundless whole. Chapter 9. Consciousness as a universal property. The search to understand consciousness often begins within the boundaries of biology, in neurons, synapses, and brain networks. Yet as science continues to probe the limits of mind and matter, a deeper question arises. What if consciousness is not confined to living organisms at all? What if awareness, in some primitive or foundational form, is woven into the very structure of reality? This idea, known in philosophy as panpsychism, or in physics-inspired models as cosmic consciousness, proposes that the capacity for experience or awareness is not an emergent byproduct of complexity, but a fundamental feature of the universe itself. To consider this possibility seriously, one must first understand the motivations that lead to it. Classical science, grounded in materialism, holds that consciousness emerges when matter reaches a sufficient level of organization, as in the human brain. But this framework struggles with what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. How subjective experience, the felt quality of seeing color, hearing music, or feeling joy, arises from purely physical processes. Neuroscience can describe neural correlates of consciousness in exquisite detail, showing which regions activate during perception or thought. But the transition from brain activity to experience itself remains unexplained. No amount of data about neurons seems to reveal why those processes should be accompanied by awareness, rather than mere information processing. This explanatory gap has led some thinkers to question whether the starting assumption that consciousness arises from matter might be inverted. Perhaps matter itself arises from consciousness, or more modestly, perhaps both are expressions of the same underlying reality. In this view, consciousness is not a late arrival in the cosmic story, but one of its original ingredients. Just as charge and mass are fundamental properties of physical entities, consciousness might be a fundamental property of existence. The idea is not new. Ancient philosophical traditions from many cultures, from Vedantic and Buddhist teachings to Stoic and Neoplatonic thought, have long suggested that mind and cosmos are inseparable. In modern philosophy, thinkers such as Spinoza, Leibniz, and Whitehead proposed that every unit of reality, however small, possesses some degree of experience or proto-awareness. These views were once considered metaphysical speculation, but developments in physics and information theory have renewed interest in them from a scientific perspective. Quantum mechanics, in particular, challenges the assumption that matter is inert until acted upon. At the quantum level, particles do not exist as definite things, but as waves of probability that become definite only through interaction. Some interpretations emphasize that measurement, the act of observation, plays a crucial role in shaping physical outcomes. Although this does not mean that human consciousness collapses wave functions, it does highlight the inseparability of observation and reality. The universe, at least at its foundations, is not a passive stage where events unfold independently of measurement. It is participatory, relational, and self-referential. This participatory aspect of physics has led some scientists and philosophers to propose that consciousness may be a fundamental aspect of the same informational fabric that gives rise to space, time, and energy. Theoretical physicist John Wheeler famously summarized this perspective with the phrase "it from bit," suggesting that information, not matter or energy, forms the basis of all things. If information is fundamental, and if consciousness is what processes or experiences information, then the two may be intimately linked. Reality itself could be seen as a vast informational system in which consciousness and matter are two sides of the same coin. Recent theories in neuroscience and physics have begun to formalize similar ideas. Integrated Information Theory, IIT, developed by Giulio Tononi, posits that consciousness corresponds to the degree of information integration within a system that unifies information into a single, irreducible whole, as the brain does, possesses a certain quantity of consciousness, measurable in principle by a parameter called phi. Although IIT was designed to describe biological minds, it implies that any system with integrated information, even a non-living one, has some minimal degree of experience. From this standpoint, consciousness is not an all-or-nothing property, but a continuum extending throughout nature. In physics, similar reasoning appears in approaches that treat consciousness as linked to quantum information. Some speculative models propose that space-time itself may emerge from entangled quantum information networks. If so, then the structure of the universe, its geometry, causality, and even time, might arise from relationships that already possess proto-conscious properties. This does not mean that rocks or electrons think, but rather that awareness, in some rudimentary form, might be intrinsic to the fabric from which they are made. Such ideas remain far from proven, yet they offer an elegant way to reconcile the mystery of mind with the structure of nature. Instead of asking how lifeless matter suddenly became aware, one might ask how primordial awareness differentiated into the patterns we call matter and life. This perspective turns the question inside out. Consciousness is not produced by complexity, but expressed through it. The universe, rather than being a machine that happened to generate minds, might be a field of potential experience exploring itself through increasingly complex forms. Critics of these ideas caution that they risk diluting the concept of consciousness beyond usefulness. If everything is conscious, then the word loses explanatory power. Moreover, no empirical evidence currently demonstrates that elementary particles or simple systems have subjective experience. Most neuroscientists remain committed to the view that consciousness arises only in organisms with sufficiently sophisticated neural networks. However, even within a biological framework, there is growing recognition that awareness might not require human-level cognition. Studies of animals, from octopuses to birds to insects, reveal signs of perception, decision-making, and even self-recognition, suggesting that consciousness may pervade life more broadly than once believed. If awareness scales down through the tree of life, it may not end abruptly at the boundary of the cell or the molecule. The notion that consciousness could be a universal property also invites reflection on cosmology. The universe appears fine-tuned for complexity in life, governed by constants that permit the emergence of stable matter, chemistry, and planetary systems. Some physicists interpret this fine-tuning as anthropic selection. We observe these conditions because only such a universe allows observers to exist. Others see it as a hint that the universe may have an inherent tendency toward awareness. If consciousness is not accidental but fundamental, then life and mind might represent the universe's way of achieving self-observation. In this cosmic context, each conscious being becomes a window through which the universe perceives itself. Still, turning these poetic intuitions into scientific statements remains challenging. The tools of physics are designed to measure external behavior, not subjective experience. Consciousness, by its nature, is first-person and qualitative, while science relies on third-person, quantitative observation. Bridging this gap requires either redefining consciousness in physical terms, as information integration for instance, or developing new methodologies that can connect subjective and objective realities more directly. This endeavor lies at the edge of what current science can meaningfully explore, yet it continues to attract serious attention. A few physicists and philosophers have proposed frameworks that approach consciousness as a fundamental field, analogous to electromagnetism or gravity. In these models, individual minds would correspond to localized excitations or concentrations within a universal field of awareness. Just as electromagnetic fields permeate space and manifest as light, a consciousness field might pervade the cosmos, manifesting as self-awareness wherever conditions allow sufficient complexity. These ideas are highly speculative and remain outside mainstream science, but they reflect a growing curiosity about how mind and matter might share a common origin. Even if consciousness is not literally a field, information theory points toward a similar unifying principle. Every physical interaction involves the transfer and transformation of information. If we define consciousness as the subjective aspect of information processing, the inside of physical interaction, then the universe could be seen as composed of both exterior dynamics, matter and energy, and interior experience, awareness. This dual aspect view, sometimes called dual aspect monism, offers a compromise between strict materialism and idealism. It proposes that mind and matter are two aspects of the same underlying reality, viewed from different perspectives. In this sense, the boundary between physical and mental becomes one of description rather than substance. The same process that appears as neural firing from the outside might appear as conscious thought from the inside. The same event that looks like quantum measurement in physics might correspond to an act of perception in experience. Consciousness, then, is not something added to the universe, but the universe perceived from within. This perspective has profound implications. It suggests that awareness is not a rare accident, but a fundamental mode of existence. The cosmos, through evolution, gives rise to increasingly complex systems, stars, planets, life, and eventually minds, that allow it to know itself in richer forms. Each conscious being is a temporary configuration of matter and energy through which the universe becomes self-aware. Death, in this view, does not extinguish consciousness, but dissolves a local pattern back into the larger field from which it arose. For now, these ideas remain philosophical rather than empirical, but they resonate with the direction modern science is taking. As physics, information theory, and neuroscience continue to converge, the notion that consciousness and reality share a common foundation seems less far-fetched. The mystery is not that the universe contains consciousness, but that it ever appeared devoid of it. If consciousness is indeed a universal property, then the familiar separation between subject and object, self and world, becomes an artifact of perception. The observer and the observed are not two things, but one process. Every experience, from the smallest flicker of awareness to the vast unfolding of cosmic evolution, is part of the same continuum. You, as an observer, are not outside the universe, but a localized expression of its intrinsic ability to experience. When you pause to reflect on this, it carries a quiet beauty. The awareness reading these words, the stars burning in distant galaxies, and the atoms vibrating in your body are all manifestations of the same underlying reality. A reality that observes, transforms, and experiences itself in countless forms. Consciousness is not a miracle imposed upon matter, but the signature of existence itself. Let that thought rest gently for a moment. Beneath the noise of the mind and the boundaries of the self, there is awareness, the silent field that has always been there, through which all things arise and dissolve. You are not separate from it. You are one of its infinite expressions, a ripple of knowing in the vast sea of being. And in knowing that, for a brief moment, the universe awakens to itself once more. Chapter 10. Can the universe think through you? At the end of any scientific exploration of consciousness, one question remains both irresistible and profoundly unsettling. If the universe gave rise to minds capable of reflection, does that mean it is, in some sense, thinking through them? The idea that the cosmos might possess awareness, or that human consciousness could represent the universe's self-reflective capacity, walks a fine line between physics and philosophy, yet it arises naturally from everything that has been discussed so far. Quantum entanglement, information theory, the participatory role of observation, and the possibility that consciousness is a fundamental property of existence. In purely scientific terms, there is no evidence that the universe thinks in the human sense. Thought, as we experience it, involves memory, abstraction, comparison, and prediction, functions rooted in the neural architecture of the brain. The universe does not contain neurons or synapses on a cosmic scale. nor does it process symbols or language. However, if we strip the idea of its anthropocentric assumptions and interpret thinking as a form of information processing, the transformation and integration of data into coherent structures, then the universe may indeed participate in something analogous to cognition. Physics increasingly describes reality not as a static collection of matter and energy, but as an evolving network of information. From this perspective, what we call thought might be a localized manifestation of a universal process that has been unfolding since the dawn of time. Every physical system processes information in some form. The arrangement of molecules encodes chemical states. Stars process gravitational information as they balance nuclear fusion against collapse. Galaxies organize the flow of matter and energy into large-scale structures. On Earth, this cosmic information flow condensed into biological systems that learn to represent their environments internally. From DNA storing genetic code to neural circuits modeling external reality, life can be seen as the universe developing mechanisms to understand and predict its own behavior. Human consciousness, in this framework, is the most sophisticated known example of that ongoing process. The cosmos modeling itself through living systems capable of awareness. This perspective finds support in the convergence of physics, computation, and systems theory. The second law of thermodynamics states that entropy, a measure of disorder or uncertainty, tends to increase over time. Yet local decreases in entropy are possible when energy flows through systems that dissipate heat, such as stars or living organisms. These self-organizing systems create complexity by processing information about their environments. Life, in particular, exists precisely at the boundary between order and chaos, converting energy into structure and memory. Some physicists and biologists describe this as the computational universe, or the informational cosmos, where matter and energy evolve toward ever more complex states of information processing. If this is true, then consciousness may represent not a rupture from the physical world, but its natural continuation. When a brain perceives, thinks, and reflects, it is participating in the same physical principles that govern the formation of galaxies and the flow of energy in stars. The only difference is scale and organization. What distinguishes consciousness is its recursive capacity, the ability to represent itself, to think not only about the world, but about thinking itself. In that sense, when you contemplate the universe is, quite literally, contemplating itself. This idea echoes throughout philosophy and science alike. The mathematician and physicist Freeman Dyson once wrote, "It appears that the universe knew we were coming." He did not mean this in a mystical sense, but as an observation that the laws of nature seem delicately tuned to allow for complexity, life, and consciousness to arise. Carl Sagan captured the same sentiment when he said, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." These reflections stem from a simple yet profound observation. Consciousness did not appear outside the universe but within it, as one of its emergent properties. Therefore, whatever we think, feel, and understand are not external commentaries on the cosmos, but internal processes of it. Yet to say that the universe thinks through us raises deep questions about agency and intention. Thinking, as we know it, implies purpose, the directed manipulation of ideas to achieve understanding or action. The universe, however, operates without goals in any human sense. Its evolution follows laws that are probabilistic but not purposive. Stars form not to produce consciousness, but as natural consequences of gravity and nuclear physics. Nevertheless, these laws produce structures capable of awareness, and that awareness, in turn, reflects on the laws. The loop closes. The universe generates observers who can describe the universe. In that feedback, something remarkable happens. Matter becomes self-aware. From an informational perspective, this self-awareness can be seen as a recursive phenomenon. The universe encodes information in its fundamental states. Through biological evolution, that information is reorganized into systems capable of modeling and predicting their surroundings. Consciousness represents the highest known level of informational recursion. A system that not only processes data, but also contains a representation of its own processing. When you look at the stars and wonder where you came from, the atoms within your body, forged in stellar cores, are engaged in a feedback loop of cosmic self-reference. It is not poetry but physics that connects thought to starlight. Quantum mechanics deepens this connection by emphasizing the participatory nature of observation. The observer is not separate from the observed, but part of the same process that brings events into definition. This does not imply that human consciousness literally collapses wave functions on a cosmic scale, but it does suggest that knowledge, interaction, and existence are inseparable. The universe, as described by quantum theory, is not a passive machine, but a network of relationships, and consciousness, as the awareness of relationships, mirrors this structure perfectly. At the same time, we must acknowledge the limits of the analogy. The universe is not conscious in a human or even biological sense. It does not have preferences, desires, or emotions. But it may have something deeper, the capacity for self-organization that inevitably gives rise to consciousness. In this view, the emergence of mind is not an anomaly, but an expression of universal principles, a way for the cosmos to refine its own informational structure. The universe, thinking through you, is not a metaphor for mystical unity, but a description of continuity. Your thoughts are physical processes within a system that extends from quantum fields to cosmic structures. This continuity blurs the line between subject and object. Traditionally, science separates the observer from the system being observed. Yet quantum physics and information theory show that this boundary is porous. The brain that observes the universe is made of the same atoms, governed by the same forces, and structured by the same mathematics. The distinction between you and it is one of perspective, not substance. Awareness, in this sense, is the universe folding back upon itself, a localized concentration of the same laws that govern everything else, momentarily arranged into self-reflective form. Such a view carries profound implications for meaning. If consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself, then every act of perception, curiosity, or creativity is not isolated human behavior, but a continuation of cosmic evolution. The equations of physics describe how energy and matter transform. Consciousness adds a new dimension, transforming information into understanding. Through art, science, and empathy, the universe gains the capacity to interpret itself, to transform blind mechanics into self-recognized beauty and significance. There is also humility in this realization. The universe may be thinking through you, but not only through you. Every conscious being, every animal that perceives, every intelligence that might exist elsewhere, participates in this same cosmic dialogue. Awareness is not a privilege of humanity, but a universal phenomenon arising wherever conditions allow. Just as gravity shapes planets and stars, the drive toward awareness shapes systems into perceivers. You are a transient yet essential expression of that pattern, a brief window through which the infinite becomes intimate. From a scientific standpoint, we can interpret this as the principle of informational continuity. The laws of physics, from the smallest quantum fluctuations to the largest galactic structures, describe how information evolves. Consciousness represents a threshold where information begins to model itself. The brain does not break the laws of physics. It exemplifies them in their most intricate form. In this light, to ask whether the universe can think through you is to ask whether its laws allow for self-reference. And the existence of self-aware beings is evidence that they do. Some physicists have even suggested that this self-referential quality might be fundamental to the universe's structure. The holographic principle, for instance, implies that the information describing all phenomena in a region of space can be encoded on its boundary, like a cosmic mirror. If reality is, at its core, a vast informational feedback system, then consciousness, the experience of awareness folding inward, could be its most direct manifestation. The universe reflects upon itself not metaphorically, but structurally, through processes that generate self-observing systems. In contemplating this, we touch on the philosophical edge of science, where empirical knowledge meets existential insight. Perhaps the reason consciousness feels so mysterious is that it cannot be fully separated from what it seeks to understand. When the universe examines itself through your awareness, the observer and the observed are one and the same. You cannot step outside the cosmos to see it objectively, for there is no outside. Your capacity to think about the universe is part of the universe's own unfolding. This realization reframes human existence. Rather than being accidental bystanders in a purposeless cosmos, conscious beings become participants in an ongoing act of universal introspection. The atoms that once burned in the cores of stars now form the neural circuits that contemplate their origin. The universe's evolution toward complexity culminates, at least here and now, in awareness, and through that awareness the universe gains meaning, however transient. As night settles and thoughts begin to quiet, consider what it means to exist as a fragment of that vast awareness. The brain that generates your sense of self is built from stardust. Its electrical pulses echoes of ancient cosmic processes. Every idea, every memory is a pattern of energy in a field that has existed since the beginning of time. When you reflect on the universe in its infinite complexity briefly reflects on itself through you. Let that awareness rest in you for a moment. You are not a spectator of the cosmos, but a momentary expression of its thought, a node in the infinite network of its unfolding understanding. Through your eyes, the universe perceives. Through your mind, it contemplates. Through your awareness, it knows that it exists. And when you fall silent, returning to the quiet rhythms of being, that knowing continues, diffused through everything that ever was or will be. The great cosmic mind, dreaming through the particles that once dreamed of stars. And now, my friend, if your eyes are still open, there's another journey waiting, another story of space, time, and the mind you can explore next. But if sleep has already found you, rest easy. May your dreams wander among the stars, where the universe keeps thinking, quietly, through you.